So this evening, I want to share with you some thoughts on a passage which has always been one that has touched me a little bit when I've read it. And John Tass last week spoke about it, or touched upon it. And then during the week I thought I'd share a few further thoughts on this passage. So please join me and open up your Bibles to the Gospel of Mark, a well-known passage, the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5. I'm not going to read the whole chapter. I'm going to read only the second half of the chapter, verse 21 to 43. So the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5, verse 21 to 43. And it's a story of two people that are touched by Jesus, and we'll discover that as we read. So I'll read from verse 21. Now when Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter lies at a point of death. Come and lay your hands on her that she may be healed, and she will live." So Jesus went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him. Now a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years, and had suffered many things from many physicians. She had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd, and touched his garment, for she said, if only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well." Immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" But his disciples said to him, "You see the multitude thronging you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" And looked around to see her who had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." While he was still speaking, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house and said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not be afraid, only believe." And he permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Then he came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue and saw a tumult, and those who wept and wailed loudly. When he came in, he said to them, "Why make this commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they ridiculed him. But when he had put them all outside, he took the father and the mother of the child and those who were with him, and entered where the child was lying. Then he took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha kumi," which is translated, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl arose and walked, for she was 12 years of age, and they were overcome with great amazement. But he commanded them strictly that no one should know about it, and he said something should be given to her to eat. A powerful passage. And in fact, if you read the passages beforehand and also the preceding chapters, you will note that you sense that we follow Jesus from one helpless and hopeless situation to another. We've witnessed in the preceding verses that we haven't read, but at the start of chapter 5, demonstrate his power over a stormy sea. A demon-possessed man is made well, and now a very sick woman is made well as well. And Jesus is proving here that he is more than adequate for any situation that he faced. So Jesus spoke, and when he did, a raging storm and a sudden and a tossing tumultuous sea suddenly became calm. At his command, a man who was held captive by the devil was set free. And his power instantly healed a woman caught in the grip of a terrible illness just by touching his robe. And these three episodes prove to us that Jesus was demonstrating that he was the master of the hopeless situation. And we thank God that we serve a Lord who possesses all power. And as we read in Luke chapter 1, verse 37, we serve a Lord within whom nothing is impossible. And today our text takes us to another hopeless situation. And it should give us hope, this text, when our own desperate times come. So I like usually giving titles to my sermons, and the title I've given this one is from verse 36, where we read the Lord saying to Jairus, "Do not be afraid, only believe." Do not be afraid, only believe. And as we look through this passage together this evening, I'd like us to see this father's faith in action. There's two stories sort of running in parallel. I'm going to focus on Jairus this evening. There's so much to talk about with the woman who was obviously quite unwell as well and touched Jesus' garment. But what I want to look at is this father's faith. I want to see how his faith progressed as his struggle progressed as well, how he endured. And what we can learn from this passage will hopefully help us to overcome our fears and to build our faith during the hard times of life. So Jesus, in verses 21 to 24, had just returned from a night at sea. Now he and his disciples went to the side of the lake, and while he was there, Jesus delivered in the preceding verses in chapter 5 a poor man from the grip of Satan. And he did that by casting out the demons that possessed him. Now Jesus has returned to Capernaum and is immediately met by a massive crowd of people. You know, and to me, I'm just thinking about this today. I went to Chatty and there was just people everywhere. People pressing against you. There's no social distancing there anymore. And this is what Jesus was having. He was, because of the works and the miracles he was performing, word travelled quickly, and people were curious. People wanted to hear him speak. People had needs, and they were just coming out to hear him, and that was resulting in massive crowds and people coming for different reasons. Now, a man named Jairus, we read, rushes into the crowd surrounding Jesus, and it is his story that serves as a focus for us in these verses. He's a man who has a little bit of faith, which is about to grow very large. And this man, as we read in verse 22, is a ruler of the synagogue. And this means that he was one of the officials who oversaw the business of the synagogue. He would have been an important man of standing in the community. Jairus would have possessed power, some privilege, prestige. He had a position. He probably had a bit of money as well, and he was a prominent man in his society. And as I said, he would have been wealthy, with a fine home and servants. And he was a religious man who faithfully would have practiced the Jewish faith and the law, being that he was a ruler of the synagogue. And at this moment in his life, none of these things that usually seemed important to Jairus mattered in the least. Sickness, deadly sickness, had visited this home of Jairus, and none of the things that mattered in his life could drive sickness away. His power, his money, his position in the community, even his religion, were all powerless against this enemy of sickness and death. His little daughter, 12-year-old daughter, was dying and he needed help. And Jairus needed help that none of his resources that he had could provide. And it's funny when, we worry about the things of the world, or we worry about our work, or, relationships, and all of a sudden someone in our family gets sick. Terminal illness. Death is knocking at the door. And all of a sudden, all these worries that we had, all these concerns seem so minuscule, and we are suddenly faced with this huge problem that we are powerless to deal with. And this must have been the same for Jairus, and it must have been very difficult for him. After all, he's a ruler of the synagogue, and as we know, most of his colleagues, if not all, disapproved of this Jesus Christ and of his methods. Yet this father, Jairus, is desperate, and he turns to this man named Jesus for the help that he needs. Fear of death, love for his daughter, and a sense of utter helplessness drove this man to Jesus. Now Jairus doesn't understand everything there is to know about Jesus, but he has come to hear about this man and to believe that this man can heal. Let me just remind you and remind myself that tragedy doesn't care who you are. Trials of life are not going to pass you by, and we read about that in God's Word. John chapter 16, verse 33, we read, "These things I've spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. But in the world you will have tribulation. But be of good cheer, I've overcome the world." Tragedy doesn't care that you go to church. It doesn't care that you serve in a ministry. It doesn't care about your achievements, your assets. Sickness and death don't care about who you are or what your standing is in the world that we live in. And when the trials of life come, you need a resource outside of yourself. When death and sickness and sorrow, marital trouble, financial trouble, etc., whatever it is that burdens you come, you need more than some religion or the things of this world that you've accumulated or your perceived influence. You need a faith that rests in Jesus and in his power alone. And perhaps Jairus had heard what Jesus can do just by touching someone who's diseased. There would have been a lot of talk about this in the synagogue. And I'm sure that he had heard the stories about the amazing power of this man, Jesus. Regardless of whether he had heard about it or maybe he had seen it with his own eyes, Jairus believes that Jesus can do this now for his own daughter. He believes that the Lord's touch will bring healing to his child, and thus this powerful man, this man of standing in this community, of authority, humbles himself at the feet of Jesus and cries out for the help that he needs. This is the kind of faith that the Lord is looking for in your life and in mine. He wants us to come to him, not trusting in our own abilities. And dare I say, many of us struggle in our own abilities, trying to overcome things in our own strength or in our own way before we turn and surrender to God to take care of what is ailing us, to help us overcome and to deal with the troubles of this world. And how much grief and hurt can we avoid by coming to Him first? Like Jairus, there are many times when our faith is only small and quite weak. But like Jairus, our faith must be in the Lord and in His ability. Faith in Jesus is faith that will always be honoured by God. In Mark chapter 9, verse 23, we read, "All things are possible to him who believes." Faith in Jesus in the depths of our trouble may start out very small, but it will not stay that way for long if we surrender to Him. God has said, Jesus Himself said, "You have faith like a mustard seed, you will move mountains." God has a way of growing our faith as we walk with Him through the troubled times of our lives. And in verse 24 to 35, we see this faith that Jairus has being put to tremendous test. A hopeless situation with his little girl at home, deathly unwell, grows worse with each passing moment, and a faith that was weak is now being brought to a breaking point. And now Jesus, when He hears the request of Jairus, leaves to go with him to heal his daughter. And as he goes, and I said before, he's thronged, pressed upon by a crowd of many people. There would have been a lot of noise. You know, it would be like trying to navigate your way through just a thick bunch of people. They'd be pressing from each side, losing sight of the disciples. Jairus is probably pulling Jesus or trying to lead him through the throng. And a very sick woman touches his garments and is healed. And that's another story in itself, which is a beautiful story which hopefully we can look at another time. And Jesus stops, firstly to ask, to confront, and then to comfort this woman. And what an amazing and beautiful moment that is as well. But for Jairus, precious minutes are passing by. He's being delayed. And it's very possible, because we read that this woman was very sick for many years. She would have been obviously unclean because she was bleeding. She would have been known to the synagogue because she couldn't have gone in because she was unclean for so many years. She'd spent all her money on people trying to heal her. She would have possibly been known to Jairus. And he would have known about this woman and her condition. And if so, he knows that she's been sick for 12 years. And he's probably thinking, why couldn't you wait another hour? She's been sick for 12 years. My daughter is dying now. And another hour for her to be healed wouldn't have killed her. But my daughter might die. And he's probably thinking this interruption, he's probably getting agitated. His faith is being tested, that it would probably kill his daughter. We don't know what was going through the mind of Jairus. He was probably waiting impatiently, respectfully for Jesus. His stomach in knots. And if you're waiting for something, like if you're waiting for results, I remember when, and I've said this before, when many years ago, when my daughter Eleanor was, I think 5 years old or 4 or 5, she was quite unwell for a long period of time with a lot of high fevers. And taking her to doctors, and it wouldn't go away, antibiotics wouldn't go away. And then we took to the children's. And the guys in the children's hospital said to me, an ED said, look, we just need to exclude that she's got leukemia, because this is one of the signs of leukemia. That's how it presents itself. High fevers, which don't come down. We'll do a blood test, and once we exclude that, we'll obviously deal with whatever it is. And I remember doing that blood test and waiting for about an hour and a half. And I remember sitting in that McDonald's at the old children's hospital, my stomach in knots, thinking my life is either going to change forever or just continue. And that time seemed like forever. And thankfully, it was tonsillitis. But that time that I was waiting for those results, and I'm sure all of you have gone through something similar, was what would have been going through the mind of Jairus. Just hurry up, please come with me, I need to deal with this, I need to know what's happening. That anxiety would have completely gripped his heart. And on the surface, the Lord's delay seems, on the surface, a little insensitive. He knows the seriousness of the situation. He knows the broken heart and anxiety of the Father. He knows the urgency of the need. But Jesus pauses to take care of this other need at hand as well. And what seems to be harsh on the surface also has some important lessons to teach us. God doesn't run on our schedule. God is not bound by the constraints of time or space. It may surprise you, God doesn't possess a wristwatch or a calendar. The delays of life sometimes don't make sense, but they may and are designed, when the delays come from God, to increase our faith. And there's many illustrations of this in the Bible. For example, I was thinking, look at Joseph. The delays in him being given justice, thrown in prison, into a pit. Well, first he was thrown into a pit, then into slavery, then into prison. And out of that delay, God gives you a prime minister of Egypt and a powerful man of God. So when God doesn't move as quickly as you may like, you must trust him anyway. And in verse 35, as Jesus is finally finishing up with this woman, some people, and I can imagine he's just finishing up, turning away to follow Jairus again, and Jairus saying, "Great, we're going again." Some people come from the home of Jairus with devastating news. His daughter has died. And notice the cold way in which they inform this poor father. There's no compassion from what I could see. There is no comfort, no sympathy. There's nothing but cold, hard fact. Your daughter, and I'm reading the text, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? Don't bother Jesus, they're saying. Even he can't fix this problem. Your daughter is dead, and that's just the way it is. And surely this news would have rocked Jairus to his core. I can just imagine, for those of you who have children, and even if you don't have children, for a loved one, oh no, I'm too late. My poor girl, if I'd done this sooner, if we hadn't delayed, if all these people weren't here. Have you ever faced a similar situation? The facts stare at you in the face, and every one of them cries out, "No hope! No hope." That we know that is how Mary and Martha felt when Lazarus fell ill. And then they sent for Jesus to come and heal him, but he wasn't there in time. That may have been how the disciples felt in the preceding chapters when they were out there in the sea, in a little boat, in a huge storm. They thought there was no hope. But we can't see what God is doing behind the scenes. Sometimes it appears that he's taking his time when we just want him to move swiftly. And God has a plan for our situation. Even when you can't see what the Lord is doing, learn to trust him. And that little bit of faith that you have, God will increase and will sustain you. Even when you can't see what he's doing, when it doesn't make sense, For those that love Him, God is working to accomplish His plans and purpose in your life. And His plans and His purpose in your life may not be aligned to what you think they should be. But ultimately, His will is for Him to be glorified through us, through our actions, through our faith, through our witness, through our testimony. So in verse 36 to 39, Jesus overhears the words of those who have brought the news of the girl's death. I can imagine Jairus was leading in front, Jesus was a few steps behind, and Jesus pushes himself to the front next to Jairus and addresses those who had come to give the news. Jesus knows the fear that rests within the heart of Jairus. He knows his devastation, and he says those beautiful words, Jairus, do not be afraid. Only believe. Only believe. He's saying, don't believe what you know, in that your daughter is dead. Don't believe in what you will see, the lifeless body of your precious daughter. Most of all, don't believe what you think makes sense. Just trust in me. He's saying to him, Jairus, you believed me when you came to me a few minutes ago. Keep on believing in me now. So Jesus and Jairus continue on to his home. When they arrive, they find the mourners are already there. The wailing and crying and sad tunes were being played out on flutes. And as I was reading some commentaries on this, it's actually quite common for someone who was wealthy like Jairus, who was a ruler. You actually hire people that are professional wailers, just to express your grief even better. And people were actually paid. There was professional groups that would come and would wail for your deceased one. That's part of the culture. And Jesus sees this mourning going on. Jesus is watching this show, and he knows there's no genuine grief involved by many of those there. The mourners are coming because it's their duty to, but they don't understand the pain of this family. The only people really hurting are Jairus and his wife. And Jesus approaches this scene and makes a strange statement. He tells the mourners to stop their carry-on, their wailing, because the little girl is not dead, but only sleeping. And this is where we get this hint that if they were truly grieving for this girl, they would have thought, oh, really? Okay, tell us more. But these mourners, they just started ridiculing him, laughing at him. But there is so much truth in his words. When Jesus says the girl is sleeping, as a parallel thought, he reveals a proper perspective of death for those that know Jesus Christ. When death claims a believer, the body lies down to sleep, but the soul goes on to be with the Lord. There is no real death for a child of God. And that is such a comfort to all of us. And looking around, all of us have lost loved ones at some stage. All of us have gone through the pain of death. But be comforted in knowing that that person that you lost, who's a believer, is now with the Lord. And the same consciousness that he or she had now amongst us, he or she has that same consciousness now with the Lord and enjoying his presence. John chapter 5 verse 24, we read, most assuredly I say to you, he who hears my word and believes in me who has sent me, believes in him who has sent me, has everlasting life. He shall not come into judgment, but has passed from death into life. Jesus is just letting Jairus and everyone know that he is in control of the situation as well. Healing the sick woman was no problem. Casting out a legion of demons earlier was no problem. Previous chapter, calming a raging sea, no problem. and dealing with this issue of death will prove to be no problem as well. And what a lesson of hope for us. There is not a situation that we can think of that is beyond His ability. When you are faced with a hopeless situation, remember the words of the Lord and let His words be all the support that your faith needs. Let His words, His word, secure your faith. And Jesus, in verses 40 to 43, sends the mourners and the spectators and the professional wailers, sends them all away. He takes Jairus, the girl's mother, and Peter, James and John, and enters the room where the girl's body lies. He took her by the hand and said those beautiful words, Talitha Kumi, which literally is translated to be, little girl, get up. Little girl, what a tender expression. Jesus is moved with compassion by the grief in this home, and He calls this dead girl's spirit back into her lifeless body and raises her from the dead. She obeys His command and instantly receives life. She gets up and everyone is amazed. You know, it amazes me when I read about Jesus walking on water, feeding a multitude with a small amount of food, calming a storm, healing a sickness. But nothing can showcase His divine power like Him raising someone from the dead. And if you said to me, if you could go back, time machine to the days of Jesus walking on earth, and you could see one of His miracles, which one would you want to see? I'd want to see this one. Imagine being there, the grief turning to joy, the mother and the father, their dreams and hopes shattered, all of a sudden rebuilt, as this young girl gets up and is alive again. And what does this say to us? If Jesus can do this, there is nothing impossible with Him. That lost spouse or family member who's not a believer, they can be saved. It may seem impossible to you, but they can be saved. That impossible situation that you're facing at work, in your marriage, in your personal struggles with sin, in your weakness, Jesus rose a girl from the dead. He can deal with this easily. All you need is to surrender to Him in faith. That incredible need that you think is so difficult can be met. And as we finish, one thing that I saw from this is Jesus cares about your situation. His timing is different to yours, but He cares about your situation. And a few verses that I looked up shine out like rays of hope in times of need. Hebrews chapter 4, verses 15 and 16. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weakness, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7. And casting all your cares upon Him, for He cares for you. And as we said earlier, Jesus is able to handle your situation no matter what it is. In Luke chapter 1, verse 37, which I referenced at the start. For with God, nothing will be impossible. And also Ephesians chapter 7, verse 21. Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the width and length and depth and height, to know the love of Christ, which passes knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. Now to Him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly, above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works in us. To him be the glory in the church of Christ Jesus to all generations, forever and ever. Amen. Jairus had a little bit of faith. He went through a severe testing of his faith through his experience, and by the end of it, his faith was so much greater by this encounter that he had with Jesus Christ. He discovered the power of God, and his life would never be the same. If I could leave you with anything this evening, it would be this. When sickness and even death comes, believe in Jesus. When the bottom falls out of your life and everything crumbles around you, and when the answers to your prayers are delayed, believe in Jesus. When you're ridiculed for your faith, when you're looking at a hopeless situation, believe in Jesus. I'm going to finish with a beautiful hymn that I don't think we sing often enough. The hymn is titled, "My Jesus, I Love Thee." And this amazing hymn of gratitude, of faith in who we love and know, started out as a poem written by a young man called William Ralph Featherston in 1864. And I can't speculate as to the details of his life. I couldn't really find a lot about him. But we know that he wrote this heartfelt hymn at the age of 16 because he wrote it to his aunt as a letter. Young William Featherston must have had a relationship with God beyond his years to have such a sweet insight into the matchless love of Christ and the faith that he had in him. And at 16, he wrote this amazing stanza. And he actually died ultimately, and he would have recognized what he wrote at the age of 27. He died at the age of 27. So at 16 years of age, he wrote the hymn, "My Jesus, I Love Thee." And one of the verses is, "I'll love Thee in life, I will love Thee in death, and praise Thee as long as Thou lendest me breath. And say when the death dew lies cold on my brow, if ever I loved Thee, my Jesus, it's now." 16-year-old. The faith that he had and that we have and we need to have to love him and trust in him even when things around us are falling apart. May God bless his words in our heart this evening.